All right, let's get this straight. You know, there's a kind of heat that's more than just a number on a thermometer. It's a physical presence. It's a weight on your shoulders, a pressure in your skull. Out on Nevada's Highway 95, somewhere in that God-forsaken stretch of nothing between Tonopah and Goldfield, that heat is your only real partner. And believe me, it's a lousy partner. Sits in the passenger seat and just radiates, talking your ear off about the shimmering asphalt ahead, the mirages of lakes you can never, ever reach. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday, one of those days that gets erased by the sunrise the next morning. Just gone. I was nearing the end of my shift, running my route through a sector that looks more like the surface of Mars than a piece of the United States. Emptiness. That's the word for it. A profound, soul-crushing emptiness, punctuated by the occasional lost tourist in a rental Mustang or a semi-hauling ass toward Vegas, toward lights, toward life. I'd just finished dealing with my last customer of the day, some tech bro from Palo Alto whose rented Tesla, of all the damn things, had run out of juice. He was just standing there in his $500 sneakers, staring at the no service on his phone like it had personally insulted his mother. I gave him a jump from my portable generator, listened to a 5-minute sermon on how Elon Musk was going to save humanity, and sent him on his way toward civilization. I turned my cruiser around, my faithful, beat-to-hell Ford Explorer, and pointed it back the other way, back toward nowhere. Inside the car, it was bliss. The AC unit was humming its tired, overworked song, creating a fragile bubble of cool air. The dispatch radio had been silent for 2, maybe 3 hours. They'd probably forgotten I even existed out here. Suited me just fine. Sometimes the sound of nothing coming over the radio is the best sound in the world. I toggled the scanner. Hiss, static, a faint country station from Bakersfield, bleeding through 100 miles of rock and sand. Hiss, nothing. I switched it off. Now it was just the engine's low rumble and the whistle of wind finding a crack in the window seal. Perfect. I was doing maybe 60. What's the rush? An hour left on my shift, 40 minutes to the station. I could afford to stretch it out. I leaned back in the seat, feeling the knots in my shoulders loosen just a little. This was the routine. Predictable, safe, almost meditative. The sun was starting to dip low, painting the sky in these insane shades of orange and bruised purple. It was beautiful, damn it. Even after all these years, a Nevada sunset could still make me, well, feel something. And it was right then, in that moment of near-perfect vehicular zen, that I heard it. Thump. It was soft, muffled, the sound of something shifting in the trunk. I winced. Probably the heavy-duty toolbox. I thought I'd strapped it down this morning, but on these roads, hell, these roads could rattle the fillings out of your teeth. I paid it no mind. None at all. My brain registered the sound, assigned it the most logical explanation, and immediately archived it. I kept my eyes on the road, on that endless gray ribbon cutting through the red desert. A minute passed, maybe 2. The silence became thick again, something you could feel. I'd already forgotten the noise. I was thinking about grabbing a coffee at that little diner off the turn for Beatty. Their coffee is a special kind of punishment, but it's hot and it's wet, and that's all I needed. Thump, thump. Okay, that was different. Entirely different. For one, the sound was sharper, crisper. It wasn't the sound of a heavy object sliding. This was a knock, a distinct double tap, rhythmic. For another, it had intent. There was nothing accidental about it. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel without me telling them to. The blood in my veins, which had been flowing like lazy river, suddenly felt like slush. I killed the engine's noise by shifting into neutral, letting the cruiser just coast. The truck slowed, and in the sudden, deep quiet, broken only by the soft shush of the tires, I listened. I was all ears. My whole body was an ear. Nothing. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Callahan, you're an idiot," I told myself. "You're 38 years old, 15 years on the force. You're tired, it's hot, your brain is cooking." It was a piece of gravel kicked up from the road. A bird. It was one of 1,000 logical things. I almost had myself convinced. Almost. I slipped the gear back into drive and the Explorer rolled smoothly forward. I drove another 5 miles. The tension was starting to ebb away. I was ready to have a good laugh at my own paranoia. Getting old, buddy. Time for a vacation. Go fishing. Somewhere with water and without all this damned red dust. And then it came again. Thump, thump, thump. 3 hard, deliberate knocks, and this time there was no doubt, no ambiguity. They weren't coming from underneath the car, not from outside. They were coming from the trunk of my patrol cruiser. My mind detonated, a spray of frantic, impossible thoughts. I started rewinding the morning in my head. Every morning, before every shift, I check my vehicle. Bumper to bumper, it's protocol, it's muscle memory. I could feel myself doing it. I remembered opening the trunk this morning. My standard issue gear was in there. First aid kit, tool chest, fire extinguisher, a few traffic cones, the spare tire, my heavy tactical vest for high-risk calls. That was it. The trunk was clean, practically empty. I even remembered wiping the dust off the rubber mat with a rag. I closed it, locked it. No one had been near the cruiser after me. I was alone at the station. The other deputies had rolled out earlier. The tech bro? No. I was standing with him the whole time. He never went near the back of the car. And why would he? So who the hell was knocking from inside my trunk? The thought was so insane, so utterly impossible, that for a second I was certain I was hallucinating. Heat stroke. But the sound had been too real, too physical. It had a texture. It wasn't just a noise. It was a vibration that traveled through the frame of the car, up through the seat, and into my spine. I pulled the cruiser over to the shoulder. The gravel crunched loudly under the tires. I killed the engine, and the absolute, ringing, all-consuming silence of the desert fell over me. There was nothing now to mask or muffle the sound if it came again. I sat there, motionless, in my vehicle in the middle of a vast, empty landscape. As far as I could see in any direction, there wasn't another car, another building, another human being. I was completely, utterly alone, and someone was locked in my trunk. My hand went to my hip, resting on the grip of my Glock, not because I planned on shooting anything, just to feel the cold, solid steel of it, something real in this surreal nightmare. I stared into my rearview mirror at the empty road behind me. Then I looked at the interior mirror, trying to see past the headrests, past the armored partition that separated me from back there. Nothing. A minute passed. 2, 5. The silence was so profound I could hear my own breathing, the rush of blood in my ears. Maybe I did imagine it. Maybe it was a weird acoustic trick, a resonance, anything. I just about decided to just get out, open the trunk, laugh at my own stupidity, and drive on, just to prove to myself I was sane. I put my hand on the door handle, and that's when the sound came from the trunk again. But it wasn't a knock. It was a scrape, a slow, dragging scrape, the sound of a metal belt buckle being pulled across the corrugated metal floor from the inside. Scree. And I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. 1, I wasn't crazy, and 2, I was in very, very deep trouble. The scrape was worse than the knock. The knock was a question, an impossible riddle posed from the other side of a steel wall. It was clean, concise. It could be imagined, explained away. But the scrape was the sound of a human being in distress. It was the sound of desperation, of ragged effort. It was the sound of metal on metal, a belt buckle, a shoe heel, something real and solid. It was the sound of a crime in progress happening inside my own vehicle. My hand, which had been on the door handle, snapped back as if the metal was suddenly electrified. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just sat there, encased in my bubble of AC, staring at nothing. The engine was off. The world was silent again. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, heavy with the implication of that sound. Okay, think. Don't be an idiot, Callahan. This isn't a ghost story. This is a felony. My brain, the cop part, kicked into overdrive, but it was spitting out error messages. Standard procedure for a potential kidnapping or illegal imprisonment. Acknowledge a potential threat. Secure the perimeter. Call for backup. Do not engage alone. A simple, effective mantra. But every part of that mantra felt wrong. How could I secure a perimeter when the crime scene was the car I was sitting in? And call for backup. My hand drifted toward the radio, my thumb hovering over the transmit button. The conversation played out in my head, and it was a cop's nightmare. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I've got a situation. Go ahead, 7, Brenda would say, her voice calm and professional. My 20 is Highway 95, marker 112. I have a possible kidnapping victim, confined in the trunk of my own vehicle. The silence on the other end would be deafening. Then the questions, a torrent of them. How? Who? Did I put them there? Was my vehicle compromised? Was I compromised? It would trigger a massive, chaotic response. But worse than the questions was a cold, slithering thought that coiled in my gut. How did someone get into the trunk of my locked patrol car? This wasn't some civilian vehicle. This was a cop car. The locks are heavy-duty. The trunk can't be opened from the inside. This implied one of two scenarios, both of them terrifying. Scenario A. Someone, a professional of almost ghost-like skill, managed to subdue a person and place them in my trunk during the few minutes I was distracted with the Tesla driver. It was possible, but the level of audacity was astronomical. Scenario B. The person was put there before my shift. At the station, in the motor pool, a place with cameras, other officers, mechanics. This implied the unthinkable, an inside job. It meant someone in a uniform or with access to the station was involved. And if Scenario B was true, then the radio wasn't a lifeline. It was a dinner bell. What if the call for help never makes it past a friendly dispatcher? What if my sit rep is relayed directly to the people who put this person in my trunk? What if the backup that arrives isn't there to help me? In this empty stretch of desert, 40 minutes from the nearest town, a lot of things could happen. A lot of evidence could disappear, including me. No, I couldn't make that call. Not yet. I was operating blind. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I broadcast my position to a list of potential suspects that might include the very people I'd be calling for help. Pride wasn't the issue anymore. This was survival. A new plan formed. A desperate deviation from the rule book. Step 1. Don't be a sitting duck. Step 2. Approach the vehicle with extreme caution. Step 3. Identify the person in the trunk. Victim, suspect, trap. Step 4. Then, and only then, figure out who the hell I can trust to call. It was a massive gamble. Engaging a potentially violent situation alone was career suicide. But sitting here, waiting for unknown players to make their move, felt like actual suicide. I took a deep, shuddering breath. "You're in control," I whispered to myself, the words feeling thin and foolish in the quiet car. I unholstered my Glock. The familiar weight of it in my hand was an immediate comfort, a solid piece of reality. I flicked the safety off. The small, metallic click was deafening. My eyes scanned the landscape one more time. The setting sun painted the mountains in hues of blood and rust. I wasn't looking for ghosts anymore. I was looking for the glint of a rifle scope, the dust cloud of an approaching vehicle, a sign of an ambush. The desert's emptiness was no longer a comfort. It was a perfect field of fire. I pushed the driver's side door open. The heat hit me like a physical blow, a blast furnace. It sucked the cool air from my lungs and instantly beaded my forehead with sweat. The silence outside was different, too. It was a vast, open silence filled with tiny, imperceptible noises. The buzz of some unseen insect, the rustle of wind through the dry sagebrush, any one of which could mask the sound of an approaching threat. I got out of the car, keeping my body low, using the door as a shield. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I stayed behind the door, weapon in a low-ready position, and listened. Nothing. Not a knock, not a scrape. Do they know I'm out here? Are they listening too? Slowly, carefully, I moved. I kept the bulk of the cruiser between me and the trunk, my feet crunching softly on the gravel of the shoulder. My eyes were wide, scanning everything, every shadow, every glint of light. The empty road ahead, the empty road behind, the vast, indifferent desert on either side. I felt impossibly small, impossibly exposed. I reached the rear of the cruiser. My back was pressed against the cool metal of the rear passenger side door. I could smell the hot dust, the rubber of the tires, the faint, acrid smell of my own sweat. I was at the point of no return. The trunk was just a few feet away. With my Glock held tight in my right hand, I shuffled sideways, my body tense. My left hand reached out, fingers tracing the dusty surface of the trunk lid. It felt gritty, real. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, positioned at the side of the trunk, my weapon aimed at the lock. My mind was a blank slate of pure, distilled adrenaline. All the hows and whys were gone. All the thoughts of procedure and conspiracy were gone. All that was left was the object, the problem, the trunk. My thumb found the rubberized trunk release button located just above the license plate. It was a small, unassuming square of black plastic. It was the only thing separating me from the answer. I took one last, deep breath, the hot air searing my throat. There was no more thinking, only doing. My thumb pressed the button. There was no loud clunk, just a soft pneumatic hiss as the hydraulic struts engaged and lifted the trunk lid. It rose smoothly, silently, like a slow-motion exhale. A wave of heat rolled out, a tangible thing, and a smell. It wasn't the smell of an empty space. It was the smell of a crime. Dust, the sharp, metallic scent of terror sweat, and the faint, cloying odor of burlap. My Glock was up, steady in a two-handed grip, sights centered on the dark opening. For a half-second, my eyes, accustomed to the brilliant, fading sunlight, saw only shadow. Then the details resolved themselves, and my professional brain switched from "what the hell" to "oh my God." There was a man in my trunk. He was curled up on his side, his hands zip-tied in front of him, his ankles bound with another tie. A rough burlap bag lay beside his head, as if it had been pulled off or had fallen off. He was old, maybe late 60s, with thinning gray hair and the pale, soft-looking skin of a man who spent his life indoors. He was wearing expensive-looking slacks and a sweat-soaked dress shirt. A fresh, ugly bruise was blooming on his cheekbone, and his lips were cracked and bloodless. He was alive. He blinked against the sudden light, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it felt like a physical force. My training took over, a robotic voice cutting through my shock. "Police officer, don't move. I'm here to help you." The man flinched at the word police. He stared at my uniform, at my badge, and his expression wasn't one of relief. It was one of pure, undiluted suspicion. He worked his jaw for a moment, his dry lips sticking together. His first words were a ragged, desperate whisper. "Are you with them? Did they send you to finish it?" "Who is them?" I asked, lowering my weapon slightly. This wasn't an ambush. This was a victim. "I'm alone. I found you. Sir, are you injured?" "That's what the other one said," he rasped, his eyes darting wildly around, scanning the empty desert as if expecting an attack. "The one who put me in here, he had a badge too." That sentence hit me like a physical blow. He had a badge too. My worst-case scenario, Scenario B, had just been confirmed. This was an inside job. My blood ran cold. "Okay," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, authoritative. "We need to get you out of there. I'm going to cut you loose." I holstered my weapon, a massive risk, but I couldn't help him with a gun in my hand, and pulled a multi-tool from my belt pouch. I leaned into the trunk, the heat and smell enveloping me. The man flinched as I got close, but didn't resist. I used the small, sharp blade to carefully slice through the heavy-duty plastic of the zip ties on his wrists and ankles. The raw, red welts underneath told me he'd been bound for hours. "What's your name?" I asked as I helped him sit up. He was weak, severely dehydrated. "They'll be listening," he panted, ignoring my question. "The radios. They have the radios. You can't talk, not on the radio." "I haven't," I said, a chill running down my spine. "I haven't made a call." The relief that washed over his face was immense. "Good," he breathed. "Good. You're either very smart or very lucky." As I helped him swing his legs out of the trunk, his shirt sleeve, damp with sweat, pulled back from his wrist. And I saw it. It wasn't a bruise or a scratch. It was a tattoo. Small, no bigger than a quarter, on the inside of his forearm. It was inked in a single, sharp, black line. It wasn't a crude prison tat or a faded gang sign. It was precise, clean, almost like a corporate logo. A circle with a single vertical line cutting through the top half, extending slightly above it. My brain froze. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I'd seen that symbol before, not in a spooky cold case file about a drowning man, in something far worse. It was in a briefing, a multi-agency RACO task force I'd sat in on years ago, back when I was a detective in Vegas, a briefing on a ruthless, ghost-like smuggling syndicate that had operated across 3 states. They were untouchable, known for their efficiency, their brutality, and their symbol, which they used to mark their high-value assets and shipments. The feds had spent years trying to get a handle on them before the entire organization seemingly vanished overnight, leaving a trail of dead ends and dead bodies. The case was never closed. It just went dormant. They called it the Phoenix Syndicate because everyone assumed it would rise from the ashes one day. My kidnapping victim wasn't just some random old man. He was connected. He was a piece of a puzzle I thought was long buried. "Sir," I said, my voice now tight with a new kind of urgency, a new kind of fear. "I need you to look at me. Who are you?" He finally focused on my face, seeing the shift in my expression. He saw that I recognized the mark. "My name is Elias Vance," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I was their accountant." And just like that, the scope of my problem magnified by a factor of 1,000. This wasn't just a dirty cop and a kidnapping. I had just stumbled into the middle of a war I knew nothing about, and the man who held all the secrets was sitting on the bumper of my car in the middle of nowhere, 100 miles from anyone I could trust. And the people he worked for, the people who were now hunting him, were professionals, killers, and one of them was a cop. My brain screamed at me. This is a federal witness, a RICO case. You are a county officer, and you're catastrophically out of your depth. The voice of my academy instructor, a hard-ass ex-Marine named Peterson, echoed in my head. Rule 1, Callahan, secure the scene, call it in, and wait for the big boys. But my gut screamed louder. The big boys might be the ones who signed off on this. The system wasn't just compromised, it was actively being used as a weapon. Calling this in wouldn't bring the cavalry, it would bring the wolves. Elias Vance, the Phoenix Syndicate's accountant, wasn't just a witness. He was a dead man walking, and by opening that trunk, I had started walking right beside him. "Get in the car," I said, my voice sharp, leaving no room for argument. "Front seat, now." Elias hesitated, his eyes darting from me to the vast, dark desert. To him, I was just another uniform, another potential betrayal. "Look at me," I commanded, grabbing his arm. His skin was cold despite the heat. "I know the name, the Phoenix Syndicate. I know the symbol. I also know that if we stay here another 5 minutes, we're both going to end up as another weird anecdote for the coroner. Now, get in the goddamn car." The mention of the syndicate's name seemed to break through his fear. He saw the recognition in my eyes, the genuine understanding of the danger we were in. He nodded weakly and shuffled to the passenger side. I helped him in, the old man collapsing into the seat like a puppet with its strings cut. I ran back to the driver's side, threw myself in, and slammed the car into gear. The cruiser spat gravel as I swerved back onto the highway, leaving 2 black stripes on the asphalt. My first priority was to move. My second was to think. "Where are you taking me?" Elias asked, his voice a dry rasp. "The station?" "The station's the last place we're going," I said, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "That's the first place they'll look." "They?" he asked. "The cop who put you in my trunk, and his friends. How many are there? How high up does this go?" Elias just shook his head, a gesture of weary hopelessness. "You don't understand. The Phoenix isn't just a gang. It's a corporation. It had a board of directors. It has assets. It has payroll. Cops, judges, state officials. You can't trust anyone." The words confirmed my worst fears, painting a picture of a conspiracy so vast it was suffocating. I was a rowboat in an ocean of sharks. "So, where do we go?" Elias whispered. "They'll be looking for your car. They know who you are." "Yeah," I said, a grim plan beginning to form. "They're looking for Officer Callahan, Unit 7. So, Officer Callahan has to disappear." My mind raced, flipping through a mental map of the hundreds of square miles of wilderness that made up my patrol sector. I needed somewhere isolated, defensible, and, most importantly, forgotten. A place where a patrol car would never, ever be expected to go. The old ranger station at Miller's Pass. It had been decommissioned for years. 20 miles up a dirt road that washed out half the time. No power, no phone. Perfect. I pushed the cruiser to 90, the engine roaring in protest. The sun had completely vanished, and the world was a tunnel of white headlight beams. Every pair of lights that appeared in my mirror was a potential threat. A beat-up pickup truck stayed behind me for 5 agonizing miles before finally turning off onto a side road. I didn't breathe until its taillights were gone. I was driving on pure adrenaline, my paranoia a co-pilot with its hand on the wheel. "The man who took me," Elias said suddenly, his voice quiet. "He said they were just transporting the asset. He said you were a perfect mule, a lone cop on a long, empty route, no witnesses. They were going to pick me up at the end of your shift. A simple handover." "Something went wrong," I said, glancing at him. "You woke up?" "I woke up," he confirmed, "and started making noise. I ruined their clean, simple plan. And saved your own life," I thought. "For now." We drove for another hour, deeper into the state, further away from my designated patrol zone. Finally, I saw the turnoff, an almost invisible dirt track disappearing into the dark maw of the mountains. I slowed the car, pulling over to the shoulder just before the turn. I put the car in park, but left the engine running, the headlights cutting into the darkness. I looked at the dashboard. At the radio, the small green light on the console was a beacon of civilization. It was my connection to everything I knew, to the system I had sworn to uphold. It was my lifeline. And Elias was right. They were listening. It was a tracking device leading them straight to us. "What are you doing?" Elias asked as I reached for it. I didn't answer. I wrapped my fist around the handset, the coiled cord cool against my skin. With a sharp, violent yank, I ripped it from its moorings. Wires sparked. I then reached under the dash and tore out the entire radio unit with a grunt, the sound of tearing plastic and metal brutal in the confined space. I smashed its faceplate against the dashboard for good measure. The green light died. In the sudden electronic silence, the reality of what I'd done crashed down on me. I was no longer Officer Callahan, Unit 7. I was a ghost, a man in a car with a wanted accountant, driving into the dark with no backup, no communication, and a private army of killers somewhere behind us. I had just burned my entire world to the ground. Block 5. New realistic version. The silence that followed the destruction of my radio was absolute. It was a dead, sterile silence, a void where 15 years of training, procedure, and professional identity used to be. I was untethered, a ship with its anchor line cut, adrift in a sea of darkness. Elias stared at the mangled heap of plastic and wires on the floor, then looked at me. For the first time, I think he truly believed I wasn't one of them, because no cop, clean or dirty, would ever do that. "Okay," I said, the words sounding loud in the dead air. "Let's go." I turned the cruiser off the highway and onto the dirt track. The vehicle, designed for smooth asphalt and high-speed pursuits, complained immediately. The suspension groaned, and the chassis scraped against the high, uneven ground. We crawled along at 10 miles an hour, the headlight beams bouncing wildly, illuminating a chaotic dance of skeletal trees and distorted rock formations. It felt like driving into a forgotten world. After 20 minutes that felt like an eternity, the ranger station came into view. A low, dark shape hunkered down against the mountainside, more a part of the wilderness than a human structure. I killed the engine and the lights, plunging us into near-total blackness, broken only by the cold, distant light of the stars. We sat for a full minute, listening. The only sound was the wind, a lonely, mournful sigh that swept down from the pass. "Stay here," I ordered Elias, my voice a whisper. "Don't move until I come back for you." I slipped out of the car, my Glock once again in my hand. The air was thin and bitingly cold. I moved toward the station, my boots silent on the pine needle-covered ground. The front door was unlocked, hanging slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the groan of its old hinges echoing like a gunshot. I entered low and fast, clearing the single main room in a series of practiced tactical movements. It was as I remembered, a dusty tomb filled with the ghosts of furniture. A quick sweep of the small back room confirmed it. We were alone. I went back for Elias and helped him inside, bolting the heavy wooden door behind us. The sense of security it provided was a complete illusion, but for now, it was all we had. I found a couple of old emergency candles in my go-bag and lit them. Their flickering, warm light pushed back the oppressive darkness, creating a small, fragile island of civilization in the heart of the wilderness. I sat Elias down in a chair by the cold, stone fireplace and gave him my last bottle of water. He drank it slowly, methodically, the gears in his sharp accountant's brain clearly turning again now that the immediate terror had subsided. He was no longer just a victim. He was a player again, assessing his new position on the board. "You took a hell of a risk, officer," he said, his voice stronger now. "Ripping out that radio. You're in this now, all the way." I figured that out when I found a 60-something accountant with a phoenix tattoo in my trunk, I retorted, pulling up the other chair. "So, let's stop wasting time. You said you were their accountant. Why are they so desperate to get you back? What do you know?" "It's not what I know," Elias said, looking at the flickering candlelight. "It's what I have." He reached inside his shirt. Taped to his chest with medical tape was a small, flat object wrapped in plastic. He carefully peeled it from his skin and laid it on the dusty table between us. It was a hard drive, a slim, solid-state drive built for durability. "Everything," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the small black rectangle. 15 years of everything. Every transaction, every shell corporation, every offshore account, and the payroll. He looked up at me, his eyes burning with intensity. "The list, officer. The name of every cop, prosecutor, and judge they owned. The proof." My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the Holy Grail, the one thing that could bring down an empire. "Who's the cop?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "The one who put you in my car. The one who's running this hunt." Elias leaned forward. "He's no beat cop. He runs the whole security operation for the syndicate's new venture. He's the reason they were able to operate without fear for so long. Captain Robert Jacoby." Jacoby, my captain, the man I reported to, the man who signed my paychecks, the man who had sent me out on this long, lonely patrol route this evening. It wasn't random, it was planned. My stomach turned to ice. My entire professional life had been a lie, orchestrated by a man I trusted. I was on my way to a meeting with a federal contact, Elias continued. My one shot to get this drive into the right hands and get into witness protection. But Jacoby's people grabbed me first. They were taking me somewhere to be disposed of. Using your car as the transport was tidy, a way to move me without using one of their own vehicles. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I stood up and walked to the grimy window, looking out into the impenetrable darkness. We had the evidence. We had the truth. But we were trapped in a cabin with no power, no communications, and a private army run by my own captain hunting us. "We just have to wait them out," I said, trying to convince myself. "Lay low. When they don't hear from their man, they'll assume the plan went south. They'll scatter." I turned back to Elias. The look on his face was one of profound, sorrowful pity. "You still think like a cop," he said softly. "You think they're hunting us. You're assuming they don't know where we are." "How could they?" I shot back. "There's no GPS on the cruiser that isn't tied to the radio I just destroyed. Your phone? They took it," he said. He then slowly, deliberately reached up and pinched the skin on his left shoulder just below the collarbone. He rolled a tiny, hard lump between his fingers. Jacoby is a careful man. He doesn't take chances. High-value assets get tagged. When they grabbed me, they injected this, a subcutaneous GPS transmitter. Tiny, military grade. Battery lasts for a week. The candles on the table seemed to flicker and dim. The small, safe room suddenly felt like a coffin. All my tactical maneuvering, the doubling back, destroying the radio, driving up this forgotten road, it was all a pointless little show for an audience that knew exactly where we were the entire time. "So, they've been following us?" I asked, my voice a dead monotone. Elias shook his head. "No, officer. Much worse. They've been letting us lead them." Block 6. New realistic version. The words hung in the flickering candlelight, colder and heavier than the stone of the fireplace. They've been letting us lead them. It wasn't a theory. It was a fact. The GPS tracker. My desperate, tactical retreat into the wilderness wasn't my plan at all. It was Jacoby's. He hadn't just predicted my move. He had orchestrated it. He knew I'd run. He knew I'd try to find somewhere isolated, and he'd simply allowed the tracker to lead him and his men to a location of my choosing. A location that was, no doubt, perfect for his purposes. A kill box. Isolated, no witnesses, no cell service, one way in, one way out. I hadn't found a sanctuary. I had led us to our own execution ground. "Why?" I asked, my voice a dead monotone. "Why not just take us on the highway? Why let us come all the way up here?" Elias looked at me, his accountant's mind coolly dissecting the tactical situation. "Because this is clean," he said. "On the highway, there's risk. A passing motorist, another cop stumbling upon the scene. It's messy. It leaves questions. But up here—" He gestured to the dark, oppressive woods outside the window. "Up here, 2 men can disappear. A cop who went off the rails, maybe took a bribe from a fugitive he was supposed to be transporting. They get into a dispute, kill each other. Or maybe they just get lost in the wilderness and the coyotes find them. Jacoby can write any story he wants. He's the captain. Who's going to question him?" He was right. The narrative was already written. We were just the actors, playing out our final scene. My training, my 15 years of being a reactive force, responding to calls, showing up after the crime, was useless. For the first time in my career, I had to think like the men who were coming for us. I had to think like a predator. What would Jacoby do? He wouldn't just send a team of thugs. Not for this. The hard drive was too important. The risk of it being damaged or lost in a firefight was too high. "He's coming himself," I said, the realization dawning on me. "Jacoby. He'll lead the team. He needs to secure that drive personally. And the only other person who knows it exists," Elias added quietly, nodding toward me. The fear that had been a cold knot in my stomach began to burn, transforming into a hard, angry resolve. If I was going to die up here, I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I was no longer Officer Callahan. The badge, the uniform, the rules, they were all gone, burned away with the radio. I was just a man in a box, and the wolves were at the door. "All right," I said, pushing myself to my feet. My body ached, but the adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. "Let's make this box a little harder to open." My mindset shifted. I was no longer looking at the cabin as a shelter. I was assessing it as a fortification. The heavy wooden door was solid, but its hinges were old. The windows were its weakest points, large, single panes of glass. "Elias, that fireplace," I barked, my voice taking on a command tone. "The grate, is it heavy?" He nodded. "Iron, probably 50 pounds. Good, help me with this table." Together, we dragged the heavy, solid oak table across the room and wedged it against the door, reinforcing the bolt. It wouldn't stop a battering ram, but it would slow them down. It would make noise. Next, the windows. I smashed out the glass of the back window with the butt of my Glock. The sound was shocking, a violent desecration of the quiet. I didn't want them sneaking up on us. I wanted every entry point to be a fatal funnel. I kicked one of the rickety wooden chairs apart, taking its sturdiest leg as a makeshift club. I gave it to Elias. "If they come through any other way than the front door, you swing for the head," I told him. He took it, his knuckles white, but his eyes were steady. The accountant was gone, replaced by a man with nothing left to lose. I checked my weapon. My Glock 22, standard issue. I had one full magazine in the weapon and 2 spares on my belt. 51 rounds in total. Not nearly enough. I thought about the patrol rifle locked in its rack in the cruiser. A Colt M4. It might as well have been on the moon. There was no way I was going outside now. We worked in silence, barricading the other windows with the remaining furniture. A bed frame, a small cupboard, leaving only small gaps to see and shoot through. We were entombing ourselves, turning our shelter into a makeshift pillbox. When we were done, we stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily in the flickering candlelight. The cabin was a wreck, a chaotic mess of splintered wood and broken furniture. It was a fortress of desperation. "How long do we have?" I asked. Elias glanced at his shoulder where the tracker was. They weren't moving fast. They were letting us get settled. My guess? They'll wait until just before dawn, the darkest part of the night. Standard tactical procedure. We had a few hours to sit in our self-made tomb and wait for the devil we knew to arrive. We extinguished the candles, plunging the room into near-total darkness. We couldn't afford to give them a target. We sat on the floor, our backs against the stone of the fireplace, listening to the silence. An hour passed. Then another. The waiting was a special kind of torture, a slow grinding wheel that wore down the nerves. Every gust of wind was the sound of an approaching footstep. Every snap of a twig was the sound of a sniper setting up his position. And then we heard it. It wasn't loud. It was a low, distant hum, the sound of multiple vehicles moving slowly and deliberately up the dirt track from the highway. It was a sound that didn't belong here, a mechanical growl invading the natural silence. I crawled to one of the gaps we'd left in the window barricade and peered out. Far below, in the valley, I saw them. A string of headlights, at least 3 vehicles sweeping across the darkness, methodically making their way toward us. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. There was no need for stealth. The hunt was over. The siege was about to begin. Block 7. New realistic version. The headlights went out. All of them. At once. The valley below was plunged back into an impenetrable, hostile darkness. The silence that followed was worse than the sound of their approach. It was a tactical silence, a patient, predatory silence. They were here. They were deploying, taking positions, surrounding us. The professionals had arrived. I crawled to my position by the shattered back window, my Glock feeling like a child's toy against the coming storm. Elias was a pale shape in the darkness near the fireplace, clutching the chair leg like a holy relic. The air in the cabin was thick with the smell of dust and old wood and the electric tang of our own fear. "Stay down," I whispered, the command feeling absurdly inadequate. "Don't make a sound." We waited. Every second stretched into an eternity. My ears strained, trying to decipher the whisper of the wind, trying to separate it from the sound of a boot on gravel, a body brushing against a pine branch. The waiting was the first part of the assault, the psychological attack. Then a new sound, A metallic squawk, followed by a voice that was both intimately familiar and monstrously alien. It was Captain Jacoby's voice, amplified by a megaphone, booming out of the darkness. It was the calm, authoritative voice he used in briefings, the voice I had trusted for years. "Officer Callahan, this is Captain Jacoby. You are surrounded. You have been misled by a dangerous fugitive. I am offering you a way out. Push the man, Elias Vance, out the front door, along with the item he stole from my evidence locker. You do that, and you're a hero, son. A hero who survived a deadly encounter. We can write the report any way you want." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. He was offering me a golden bridge, a return to my life. All I had to do was betray the man I'd sworn to protect and step off the edge of a cliff. "Go to hell, Jacoby!" I yelled back, my voice raw. The response was immediate. The world erupted. Automatic weapon fire tore through the night, a deafening, percussive roar. The thin wooden walls of the cabin offered no real protection. Bullets ripped through the plasterboard, sending splinters and dust flying through the air. The noise was overwhelming, a physical force that pinned us to the floor. They weren't aiming to kill us yet. This was suppressive fire, a show of force. They were demonstrating just how outgunned we were. I crawled on my stomach toward Elias, who was curled into a ball behind the stone fireplace, the only solid cover in the entire building. "He's not just a killer," Elias choked out over the din of the gunfire. "He's a sadist. He likes to play with his food." "The drive, Elias," I shouted. "Give it to me." He fumbled inside his shirt, his hands shaking, and pushed the small, plastic-wrapped hard drive into my hand. It felt warm from his body. "It's triple encrypted," he yelled, his mouth next to my ear. "The password is my daughter's name, Alina, Alina. If you get out of this, give it to Agent Coulson, FBI, Las Vegas Field Office. He was my contact. He's clean." The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it had started. The ringing in my ears was almost as loud as the shooting had been. In the sudden silence, another sound. A soft thump against the front wall, followed by a metallic hiss. "Gas!" I screamed, recognizing the sound instantly. I grabbed the blanket from the bed frame we'd used as a barricade, a dusty, moth-eaten thing, and threw it over both of our heads. It wouldn't do much, but it was better than nothing. A thick, acrid smoke began to fill the room, stinging my eyes, catching in the back of my throat. Then, a crash. The sound of the heavy front door being smashed open by a battering ram. The table we'd placed there splintered, thrown across the room. My eyes were watering uncontrollably. I was choking, disoriented. Through the haze of the tear gas, I saw shapes moving in the doorway. Dark figures in tactical gear, armed with assault rifles. Another object flew into the room, landing in the center of the floor. It wasn't another gas canister. It was small and rectangular, a flashbang. "Eyes closed, mouth open," I yelled, a pure reflex from training. I squeezed my eyes shut just as the world turned into pure white light and a deafening, bone-jarring crack. My senses were wiped out. I was blind, deaf, and choking. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard them coming in, the sound of heavy boots on the wooden floor. I knew this was it, the end of the line. I pushed myself up, my vision just a mess of swimming, distorted spots. I raised my Glock, pointing it toward the shape of the man closest to me. He was a black silhouette against the white haze, a demon in the smoke. And I fired. Block 8, new realistic version. The world exploded in a concussive roar. The bullet from my Glock hit the lead silhouette square in the chest. He staggered back with a grunt of surprise, his own weapon firing a useless burst into the ceiling before he crashed back through the doorway. His fall created a gap, and the second man tried to push through it. Muzzle flashes from outside lit the smoke-filled room in strobing, hellish snapshots. I fired twice more, aiming at the flashes. A scream of pain answered me from the darkness. I scrambled back, seeking the only real cover I had, the heavy stone of the fireplace. Splinters rained down around me as another volley of automatic fire ripped the cabin to shreds. In one of the strobing flashes, I saw Elias. He wasn't behind the fireplace with me. He had pushed himself up, holding the splintered chair leg, trying to create a diversion. He was a target. "Elias, get down!" I screamed. But it was too late. A burst of gunfire stitched across the wall behind him, and he crumpled to the floor without a sound. It wasn't dramatic. It was brutally simple. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. A wave of pure, cold rage washed over me, eclipsing the fear. This was no longer about survival. It was about seeing this through. For him, I was pinned down. They knew where I was. It was only a matter of time before they flanked me or simply buried me in a hail of lead. My magazine felt light. I had maybe 10 rounds left against at least 2 or 3 men with automatic weapons. I was going to die here, unless I changed the rules, unless I did something they would never expect. My eyes darted around in the gloom, and I saw it. On the stone hearth, right where I'd seen it when I first cleared the room. A rusted, half-full can of lantern fuel, left behind by rangers years ago. A forgotten relic. A miracle. A desperate, insane plan ignited in my mind. It was a suicide play, but my life was already forfeit. The only thing that mattered now was the drive in my pocket and making Jacoby pay. I waited for a lull in the firing as they reloaded or repositioned. I popped the rusty cap off the can with my thumb. The pungent smell of kerosene filled my nostrils. I crawled forward, staying as low as possible, and emptied the can's contents onto the dry, splintered wooden floorboards, creating a wide, slick pool between me and the doorway. I scrambled back behind the fireplace, my heart hammering. I pulled the hard drive from my pocket, ensuring it was wedged deep and secure, shielded by my body. Then I pulled out the last tool in my arsenal, the emergency flare. "Jacoby!" I yelled, my voice raw and cracking from the gas. "You want it? Come and get it!" As if on cue, the next assault began. A figure appeared in the doorway, spraying bullets wildly into the cabin. I didn't fire back. I shielded my head with my arm, struck the cap of the flare against its ignition strip, and a blinding, brilliant red light filled our tomb. In that momentary, hellish glare, I saw the faces of 2 of Jacoby's men, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion at the sudden light. I tossed the burning flare into the center of the kerosene pool. The result was not an explosion, but a colossal whoosh. The air itself caught fire. The pool of fuel ignited, and a wall of flame roared upwards, consuming the dry wood of the cabin with impossible speed. The heat was immense, a physical blow that sucked the air from my lungs. The screams of the men caught in the inferno were short and horrible. I pressed my body, my face, into the cold stone of the fireplace as my world became nothing but heat and roaring sound. The roof above me groaned, and with a deafening crash, a large section of it collapsed inwards. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. I was alive somehow. I pushed myself out of the burning wreckage, stumbling into the pre-dawn air. My clothes were smoking, my skin was scorched, and every breath was agony. The cabin behind me was a funeral pyre roaring against the dark sky. The scene was one of utter devastation. 2 bodies burning in the wreckage. A third lay just outside the door, the one I'd shot first. and standing 20 yards away, silhouetted against the flames, was a single figure. He was clutching his arm, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Captain Jacoby. He had been directing the assault from a safe distance and had been caught only by the shock wave. He saw me, and his expression hardened. He raised his sidearm. I raised mine. We were two broken men standing in the ruins of his perfect plan. There were no more words, no more lies. He fired. The bullet went wide, his aim thrown off by his injury. I fired back. My own aim was unsteady, but my bullet struck home. It hit him in the leg, and he went down with a cry of pain, his weapon clattering to the ground. I limped over to him, my Glock steady now, pointed directly at his face. The man, who had been my captain, my mentor, looked up at me from the dirt, his eyes filled with nothing but pure, pathetic hatred. I didn't kill him. Killing him would have been too easy. An escape. He deserved to see the empire he'd built burn to the ground. The sun began to rise, its clean gray light illuminating the carnage. I stood there, leaning on a pine tree, a ghost in a scorched uniform. I was burned, battered, and bleeding, but I was alive. I reached into my pocket. The hard drive was there. It was warm, but it was intact. I walked over to one of Jacoby's black SUVs, opened the door, and used the vehicle's radio. I didn't call dispatch. I didn't call the state police. I used the directory to find a number I now knew by heart. A tired voice answered on the third ring. FBI, Las Vegas. I need Agent Coulson, I said, my voice a rasp. Who's calling? Tell him it's Officer Sam Callahan, Lincoln County. Tell him. I found the Phoenix. There was a pause. Hold, please. I waited, my gun resting on my knee, my eyes on my captive captain on the ground. The sun was climbing higher, and the smoke from the cabin rose in a thin, straight line into the clear desert sky. My old life was a pile of ash behind me. I didn't know what my new life would be, but I knew it started today, and I knew it started with the truth.